Lockdown is the latest HBO Max film to hit their streaming service, but this isn't a movie that was delayed because of COVID or put on the HBO Max service as part of the Warner Brothers deal. This is actually a movie that was made during COVID quarantine like a couple months ago. They started in September, and now it's a movie that's finished and is out on HBO Max. Very quick production, obviously. I was surprised when they said it was coming out this month, but here it is, it's out. This movie is about a couple played by Anne Hathaway and Chiwetel Ejiofor that are going through some marital problems, and then their life is put on hold. You know, they're on lockdown. They can't leave the place that they're at. They're stuck together, and they already have their issues where Chiwetel Ejiofor doesn't feel fulfilled in his life. He's trying to finally hit his start. It feels like it's long delayed. And then you have Anne Hathaway, who's very successful, you know, very wealthy, but she's even has complications with where she works. You know, she's not 100% sure about what she's doing. And then an opportunity arises during their lockdown where Anne Hathaway's company is dealing with this very expensive diamond, and they're gonna steal it. This is a heist movie, they said enthusiastically. Before I begin this review, yes, this shirt is Cliff Booth from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. This might be the only time I wear this because I want to preserve it. It's such a good shirt. I love it. Let's begin the review. I'm not really a fan of Hollywood taking the COVID-19 pandemic that we've all been experiencing and trying to make profit off of it. I'm really wary of seeing COVID-19 in any project, really. It's why I haven't watched Songbird yet. I am planning on watching it before I make a worst of the year video, but I'm really dreading it because that is just like the fear-mongering and misinformation spreading about the virus, at least from the looks of the trailer and from what I've heard, the reactions from critics and audiences that have watched that. But this movie looked like it could potentially do some good because it looked like they were trying to give a little bit of insight on what a lot of people around the world are going through as far as like their jobs or their personal lives during COVID and how terrible it has affected them. So I was like, okay, I don't want to see a whole like genre of movies about the troubles of COVID-19, you know? But if this is the one movie that can like perfectly capture it, then all right, fine, why not? You know, they're trying to send a good message or trying to shed light on something good. Doug Liman was directing, and I like him a lot as a director. Born Identity, Edge of Tomorrow, and even Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I even got a bit of that vibe from the trailer. I was like, oh, is this going to be like a heist thing where they're kind of dueling with each other, Mr. and Mrs. Smith style? Who knows? Maybe, I don't know. But I was interested to see what he could do with this project, obviously. You know, the fact that he was making it in the first place had me interested because I admire him as a director so much. The writing is where I was worried because it was written by the guy who made Serenity 2 years ago. We all know how that turned out. Also starring Anne Hathaway. It's a reunion. But he did write Locke several years ago and then wrote a bunch of other stuff after that didn't really match the same critical reception. But he wrote Locke at one point, which is a movie I do really love. But if the only movie that's like good from you is about Tom Hardy driving a car and that's it, that might be a problem, especially when you're trying to write a COVID-19 movie in a short amount of time because you gotta get it into production quick while COVID is still relevant. So I was worried about that, but I didn't want to rule it out because I wanted this movie to be good just for Doug Liman's sake and maybe the actor's case, because they did get a pretty good cast in this, not just the two that I mentioned, but you had a lot of cameos that were already announced. So I was interested to see this movie just off of that alone. Could this be something that really, really did perfectly kind of capture the COVID feeling? Kinda. This movie definitely feels like something that Stephen Knight was already writing before COVID happened, and then COVID happened, and they're like, I wonder if I can turn this into a COVID thing, and we can get this made still. Maybe. This movie definitely has all the references to COVID. You know, we're on lockdown, wearing a mask to go somewhere, you know, talking with people on Zoom and Skype, you know. Like, this is a COVID movie in the sense that it has every single COVID trademark, but there's so many elements of the plot where I was like, I bet this was something else before. Like, you could take all the COVID stuff out and you would still have, like, the same kind of like themes for the characters. The characters aren't really that affected by COVID as far as like what their arcs are. Like Chiwetel Ejiofor, he just wants to, you know, be happy with the job he has, you know, and maybe getting a fresh start is what he needs. Doesn't really have a whole lot to do with COVID. And while I was watching the trailer, I thought Anne Hathaway's main thing was like she feels bad because she fired her employees because of COVID. and she feels really bad about that. Maybe a part of getting this diamond is to help them out because she cares about them so much, sticking it to this business or, government, whatever. And then as the movie goes on, it seems like she probably doesn't really care about them as far as like their financial situation because of COVID. She just cares about the guilt she feels, and she's just doing this all for herself pretty much. So what they were kind of going for, I feel like, got really muddled and mixed up, and it ultimately made the characters kind of less interesting to me. I will say that Anne Hathaway and Chiwetel Ejiofor are really acting in this. Like, you can tell they haven't been at it for a while, so this is their chance. And they are doing a really good job. They're great actors, and whenever they act with each other, you can feel the history that this couple has had. They really do work well off of each other, and they do perfectly embody these characters. You feel their frustration, but you also are relieved whenever they find some moments of happiness in this. There's certain moments when they have to carry humor in this movie, and I think they did a pretty good job with that. I don't think every joke works, though. There are a couple that, and it could be just like because a lot of times they're acting over Skype, and there's like a little bit of a disconnect there where you have someone who's like acting like they're in a regular movie, but it doesn't really translate well when you're doing it over Skype, if you know what I mean. Like, when you're acting with someone in a scene, like it, you probably wouldn't think much of it, but when you start to act when you're on Skype and, there's sometimes technical delays or stuff like that, then it kind of shows as like, oh, you're acting right now, and sometimes jokes kind of miss because of the line delivery, which is another thing. As far as the jokes go too, there's also a really bad running gag with Edgar Allan Poe that isn't bad at first. At first it's like, Chiwetel Ejiofor, he's frustrated because, he loves poetry and it seems like no one really loves the greats or whatever. It doesn't have anything really to do with the plot, except for when it eventually does, and that's when the running gag really starts to suck, and it's like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, this is really stupid. Like, if you tried to put this, like, in an actual, like, serious heist movie, like, this is still really bad. And yes, they do use the running gag to affect certain parts of the actual heist in this movie, and it's really dumb when you see it play out. But also, focusing on the heist aspect of this movie, they call it a heist movie, and I even said, like, because it's the only way you can really describe this movie, but it really doesn't become a heist movie until the last 30 minutes. And it feels like they only start actually talking about doing a heist like maybe 10 minutes before that last bit. When you watch it play out, it's just as simple as they walk in, they pretend to be people, and then they get the thing and they get out. It's really very simple. There's no tension, no suspense, and this isn't like an Ocean's 11 kind of heist movie, or at least a heist movie with some kind of twists and turns. It's just as simple as 1, 2, 3. Maybe 4 because something came up, but we got this. There's like 2 people that they even bring back that we've previously seen on Zoom that come into the movie at this point, and one of them is just there so he can help them out. He just decides like, you know what? I caught you guys doing this thing, but I'm gonna help you out because, I don't know, fuck it. And then just some guy who's there to cameo, just be like, hey, I was on Zoom earlier, remember me? Where are you going? And then out of the movie. Spoilers, I guess. I don't know how many people care about this movie. They get off scot-free, and then no one who was seen before in the movie is ever mentioned again. The company Anne Hathaway works for never mentioned again. Just they got off scot-free and everything's good. And it's like, okay, but I don't know, you have so many, characters that you introduce, and it would have been cool if maybe they had a bit more importance to the actual heist, make it a little bit more personal something, but it's treated very first draft. Like, as much as this feels like a movie that was maybe starting to be written before COVID, but then was repurposed to be a COVID movie, it also feels like it's just a first draft still. That there is still a lot more they could have done, or maybe it was because restrictions didn't allow them to get everything they needed, so they had to strip it of a lot of moving parts. But unfortunately, you kind of feel where this movie is lacking as you watch it, where you're like, oh, it would have been cool if they did this, but what if they couldn't? And with that kind of conflict present as you're watching the movie, it really does make you think, if this isn't as great as it could have been, and it's also not really as good with what you're able to do, then what was the point of even making this, especially during this time? Is it literally just so you can cash in on the idea of a COVID movie? At that point, I'm sorry, it's not worth making the movie at that point if that's all you kind of have going for it. Because as I said before, even though the actors are doing a really good job, there's parts of the characters that I just don't feel are that compelling. I already mentioned Anne Hathaway's kind of mixed motivation. But then you have Chiwetel Ejiofor's character who is like, you know, he wants to read poetry to his neighbors. He really cares about classic poets and is kind of upset that some people forget about them, to the point where they have an Edgar Allan Poe running gag, which I won't spoil, but it's really dumb. But, you know, he likes to read poetry to his neighbors. Neighbors that, because of the nature of the film, you're not going to get a whole lot of as far as, like, a well-balanced, like, well-rounded introduction to where they live and how they live and who's friends with them or whatever. But then you add in the fact that he's a shady guy. He's done some stuff in the past. He's selling his motorcycle. He's been in jail before? I think that's literally what he said. But then there's a part of him, as he literally puts it, who wants to be a bandito again. Like, there's a part of him that misses being a criminal, whatever extent that was, even, because, I'm sorry, this movie, there's certain scenes that play out for so long that it was hard for me not to be like, okay, I'm kind of checking out. So there's parts of this movie, I just watched this movie, but there's parts of it that I'm literally kind of blanking on as far as, like, what detail did they add here, or what was this kind of about? I'm not sure, you know, because the movie, it feels like they kind of have to carry out certain scenes for a certain length to kind of justify its existence, I guess. And it just left me more bored than anything else. As much as I like our two lead actors, and, you know, the cameos that you have, you know, they're fun to see pop up. You know, there's some jokes that work. And, you know, the actual idea of pulling off a heist during COVID, you know, it's a good idea. But there's so much about this movie that I just found kind of flat and draggy. Like, there's one part where, you know, Chiwetel Ejiofor, they make a big deal out of how he took some drugs last night. Like, these two potheads or something show up in his garden and they're like, hey, there's like some drugs in here. And he's like, oh, really? And it seems like the only thing that really was needed for was so he could just tell Anne Hathaway, yeah, I took drugs last night. That's it. Anne Hathaway starts talking to her grandma or her mom, like, just like randomly talking at something. It's like, what are you doing? This is now a factor in this? What is going on? There's a part of me that really wanted this movie to work. And, you know, it's competently made still, you know, it's not like technically awful, like you can tell it's really rushed as far as like how the movie is made. You know, Doug Liman, you know, he can make a competent movie. Even like the score by John Powell, it's nothing to write home about. It's not like a positive I have with the movie, but, you know, it's a score. It doesn't sound awful. It's like, okay, you did the score. It's not great, but it's not bad or awful, so, you know, no points either way. But it's more so just the writing, where you can tell, like, they either rushed this into production or this is an idea that was taken before that they just took the first draft of, and, you know, writing COVID stuff now. Really quickly, though, we gotta start soon. And you can just kind of tell, you know, a COVID heist movie sounds really cool. Maybe don't make it during COVID, though. I feel like you can really take advantage of that premise outside of this pandemic we're in, but I don't want to see COVID in movies. So I guess you have like an interesting kind of debate there of like, should we do it, should we not? And maybe you just shouldn't have. You know, I feel like any movie could have been made in the time span that this movie had. Maybe something that would work for the short amount of production time that they need. But instead they decided to do something that feels really ambitious on paper, but when you see the movie, you're like, oh, all that fuss for this? Let's announce it as an untitled Doug Liman COVID heist movie. And then you watch the movie and the heist is, you know, simple as fuck and introduced way too late, and then the movie ends abruptly without you feeling like you watched something satisfying or good. I'm gonna give Lockdown a C-. You know, it's not awful, but I don't really have a desire to watch it again. It definitely could have been better with the premise it had. But you're met with, you know, they knew they wanted to make this quickly. They wanted to capitalize on the pandemic that we're in, or they just didn't care to notice how bare bones their script was. Either way, would not recommend you check this out. But if you've seen Lockdown, leave in the comments below what you thought of it. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.